Pesach Tavshin Pevav is a few days behind us. I just wanted to share some ideas and some thoughts about Pesach that I didn't get a chance to over Yantif with the Olam. Maybe if we can share this, these ideas with some others, would be helpful. The Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah that Pesach nidainen ala tvua, that in Pesach we're judged by the amount of grain we're going to have during the year, parnasa. Obviously, it's related to the Inyanim of Amuna that we're supposed to take with us on Pesach. But the Gemara talks about it in terms of the Karban Omer, that we start off with Michael Behema on Pesach, and we work our way up, 49 days of Avodah to Sfiras Omer to regain the Madregas that we got on the Lel Yitzias Mitzrayim by the Lel HaSeder. But and then we bring Karban Shtei Alechem on Shavuos, which is Chametz, which is something that we generally don't do in the Beis HaMikdash. But fine, that's what's standard. That's what's, we all know this already. Now, I came across it in Yerushalmi and Tainus, which was very interesting. It's Yerushalmi and Brachas as well, I believe. It's put in the Medrash Rabbah that the Shirashim of Chitim go 50 amas into the ground. The Gemara there is talking about a discussion about how much it needs to rain in order for it to be considered a hefsek for a tainus, and whatever the sugyas were over there. And it struck me very interesting because we know that Klal Yisrael was in Memtes Sharei Tuma, as I state in Shloah, and as I state in other Kadmonim, and when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Megala himself to Klal Yisrael by the Lel Yitzia, so if they would have been there even just a little bit more, so then we wouldn't have made it, so to speak. Now, Ramesha Shapiro, the first thing that came to mind when I saw this Yerushalmi was that the Ramesha Shapiro has a mimer, Afike Mayim, I think it's Mimer Chavtes, where he discusses, is there such a thing as a Shar Nun B'Tumah or not? Maybe it's 49 plus, it's not exactly 50th Shar in of itself when it comes to Yonim of Tumah, but that's what's happening over here. But really, the point that I wanted to bring out is like this: in the days of old, in the times of the Chumash, and even later times when people were Avdei Avodah Zarah. So one of the things that they would do is that they would be makriv family members. We know that from Melech, we know that from the Baal, that they view their family as something that they should, take off, be mafresh a child in the family and be makriv that to the gods. Now we know the Torah is very, very strong against that. Now we know by the Korban Pesach that it has to be eaten by bayis echad, and the Maral in Gvuris has a big arichas about the inyan of achdus that the Korban Pesach brings about. That when you roast it, it holds everything together and turns it into one. And the famous medrash that Klal Yisrael is compared to a sheep, because if a sheep, even a little part of its guf hurts, if one yid's hurting, then all Klal Yisrael is hurting. On and on. There's a lot to talk about that, but the nekuda is that the reason why you have to eat the Korban Pesach with one family, Rabbi Yosef Engel, they bring it in the new Sefer Tzfaris Yosef, which is a likut from his other svarim, in the order of the parshas. So he explained this idea that's why it's eaten by one, has to be eaten by a family. And he says that the kishuf, which a lot of these Avodah Zaros were closely related to, why is it called kishuf? So the Gemara says in a few places, because the machishim pamalia shamala. What does it mean, pamalia? So he says pamalia is a lashon of family. But Alam al-Gazaktas by Sir Beis Engel says this. I don't feel funny saying it over, but I'll call upon him. The idea is that the whole point of the set was to be Oiker Avodah Zarah, Mishchu Yudechem and Avodah Zarah. So it's very tzugapas to say that that's the nakuda of what's going on with the set. Now, what does this have to do with the chita? So it goes like this: the Shvatim sold Yosef, right? Now they broke the achva of the Shvatim. There's a lot of talk about this. I'm not going to get into too much of it now. There's a lot of talk about what happens when you disturb the achva of Bnei Yisrael, of the 12 Shvatim. Now, obviously, the Shvatim themselves held that Yosef wasn't right to be part of the Shvatim, and how would they work that out? It's a discussion. But by being makriv and removing one of the brothers, it looks very problematic. It looks as if we're getting rid of one of the brothers. Now, what happens if you get rid of one of the brothers? If you break the achva, in the times of old, there was, this could be compared to Avodah Zarah, being mafresh a family member. Over here they weren't mafresh for Avodah Zarah, but here they were getting rid of him. So, it would look similar to this concept of Avodah Zarah. And it was a big time on the Shvatim that if it would, make things look like this, it'd be pretty bad. And if the whole concept of Avram Avinu and the Avis was to, bring the awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world, it'd be pretty bad if their own children would be the ones that are being, doing things that are shaloi kedin about this, which is what we like to say about the Akedah, that Avram Avinu's whole life was surrounding bringing out the Indian of Yichud Hashem and Amun and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and talking against Avodah Zarah. That's Klar, the famous Rambam at the beginning of Hilchas Avodah Zarah. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell him? HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, you got to go be Makriv Yitzchak to be on the Mizbeach. Avram Avinu's, so the shock of being Makriv your son. So we're used to saying, how could you be Makriv your child? In those days, it was a normal thing to be Makriv a child. But it was normal only because it was Avodah Zarah, and Avram Avinu's entire life was to stand up against this concept, was to stand up against this concept of Avodah Zarah. Mamela, when it comes to selling Yosef also, that's, it's coming from such a family, what a kind of terrible thing it would be to get rid of, one of the brothers, and to make it as if, there's a break in the Achva, very Avodah Zarah thing. Now, when they came into Mitzrayim, it says, Leishinu Eshemam. They didn't change the name. Why? What does this mean? How does this relate to this that we're talking about here? Because it says in the Balaturim at the beginning of Birkas Yaakov and Parshas Vayechi that there's no letters Ches and Tes in the names of the Shvatim. There's no Ches and Tes. Ches and Tes is Eisis Echita. Now, those letters did not exist in the names of the Shvatim. Because in a certain sense, I believe the Kliakar speaks out and others, that they were l'mayla menachet. They should have always kept themselves l'mayla menachet. But when they're going down to Mitzrayim, there's a shayla about breaking the achva, there's a shayla about being Avodah Avodah Zarah, so then it becomes more of a problem, and there's no ches and tes. So Leishinu Hashemam means that they weren't chayte in the sense that they made sure there was no ches and tes, there was no chatoim being done. It wasn't stam that there's Leishinu Hashemam, they didn't have names like John and Peter. They had Jewish names. Of course they had Jewish names, but it's not the imik is that they didn't allow the ches and tes, they didn't allow these letters of chet to creep into their names. Now it's true that it says that they were Avodah Avodah Zarah, but it could be that the reason why they were Avodah Avodah Zarah, Reb Shlomo Fisher has a big arichas about this in Beis Yishai in a place, trying to understand the, Medrash's Chalukim, if, they were really Avodah Avodah Zarah or not. But, Al Kapanim, that's the gist of what it is. Just to be myself a little bit, I heard from my grandfather, my wife's grandfather, as Ogazun saying, that it's very interesting. It says, B'yom hi gomel es Yitzchak. He made a party, he made a Suda, invited everyone to the Suda. And the Medrash says that B'yom hi gomel es Yitzchak, he invited everybody to come, and all the women and children came, and the women weren't able to nurse, and only Sarah was able to nurse the children. So what does this mean? What's the point of this? HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't make a nice bechinam. What's the point of this? So obviously, as an Nefesh Asher also B'charon, we could say Kipshutai, in a more, I don't say Kipshutai, but more simply, that the idea is that it would be easier for Sarah and Avram to be mashpia on people in this ofen if Sarah's physically nursing them, So, the hashpah from Sarah would get into them. It's bavos from the Ramah, that even though it's mutter for a non-Jewish nurse to nurse a child, but it's better not to. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, we heard this many, many times, because, just like Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to nurse, because from Gaisha midwives, because, it was Pib Shasa the Daber Mashchina, didn't want to, nurse from a Gaisha woman. So over here also, Rabbi Yaakov says that any child could also become on the madrega of Piv Shasal Dabra Mashchina, which is obviously a Gavaldiga madrega. But Maizedi said the pshat is like this, that the story is like this. It says very unusual thing for people in that time to make family parties, in the sense that the women and children are invited. As a general rule, when people would make parties in those days, was when they were makriv their child for Avodah Zarah, And then, obviously, the children wouldn't be there because they didn't want to see one of their brothers getting thrown into the fire, and the mothers wouldn't either be there because they would be very sad about it too. So it was just the fathers, but over here it was the women and children were all invited because Avraham Avinu was showing them that when you make a celebration, you could celebrate by not by being makriv a person's life away, in the sense that you're getting rid of this person's life by sending them to the Avodah Zarah, but in a real way that you could celebrate a Sudas mitzvah, eating and drinking regularly, without killing people, without but that's the idea that Avraham Avinu was showing them, that you could celebrate life without having death involved in it. And, to be Oiker, it was his way of being Oiker by the Zara, by inviting all these people to the Suda of B'yom Higamer L'Yitzchak. So I just want to finish off with the bracha. That's all, that we should be zeichet to continue steiging in Yonei Amuna and in Torah and in all areas of Avodas Hashem. Sei gebenched.